farms, slaves, etc., which implies that these things are biological in human beings. In other words, we have something natural in our DNA, in our blood, in our systems, or whatever, that encourages us to develop farms, to go to war, to enslave labor, whatever. That these things may have something much more fundamental than we've ever understood. Okay, now, humans and animals may also have instincts, and this is very, very controversial now. For example, the story goes that you have within your DNA all of the memories of all of your ancestors, starting at the beginning of the life of each of your ancestors, conception of each of your ancestors. The great scientist Isaac Asimov said that's absolutely ridiculous because we all start with just two tiny cells, and show me where in those two tiny cells is this massive archive of human history and of human past. But then again, it's those same two cells that have made you the billions of cells that you are, and all that you are. And I'm sort of with the jury, I'm still out on this, if you would, because there's so many important things. So many things just do not add up, if you would. For example, when you become a parent for the first time, you'll be so excited to teach your little baby how to walk. No baby was ever taught how to walk. We were all born knowing how to walk. And if somebody was so savagely cruel that they would raise a child without human contact, that child would still learn to walk. Just the same way, nobody has ever been taught how to swim. They've been taught how to get over their fear of drowning. Which also raises questions. I mean, you were born knowing how to swim, but where is it that you're getting your fear of drowning? Something inside you tells you that drowning, being in water over your head is not a good thing. And it's that same thing that tells you that people who are different from you could be dangerous, it could hurt you, it could hurt your children. Hence, this is where bigotry and prejudice gets its biological start. Also, there are a whole world of things. Spiders and snakes and dark places, things like this. The argument goes that these are all instincts that were honed into us for over thousands and thousands of years. And you see many examples of this that cannot otherwise be explained in nature. For example, iguanas are about the worst parents ever. The mother lays the eggs and they walk away and they never see Junior again, or probably never see Junior again, or whatever. You're born an iguana, you break out of your egg, you climb up outside, and something tells you to run, and run as fast as you can, and run to the highest, steepest place that you can. I mean, nobody's teaching, they don't teach you this at baby iguana school or anything like that. You're born all alone, but you're born knowing how to run and knowing you better run. And when the iguanas divide up between two groups, those that don't make it to safe high ground and are eaten by snakes who are waiting for them, and those that do. And maybe this is nature's way of making it better iguana. Survival of those who aren't dumb or whatever. But they do this. You raise kittens. You raise kittens. You raise a poor little kitten that you had to give milk to for an eyedropper once upon a time and all this stuff. You're the only parent the poor little kitten has ever known. You go outside with your kitten. Now that your kitten's growing up to be a cat, you take kitten outside. Kitten sees a dog, and what does kitten do? Kitten runs up a tree. Now, who taught the cat how to climb up a tree? Who taught the cat that dogs are bad news? Stay away from dogs. Anyway, you can see a million different, if you work with animals, you see a million different things. You say the animal was not taught this, the animal had to have known that. And so that leads to the question, do human beings have the same trait in us? Now, whether you believe in genetic memories or not, leaving all of that aside, that there are things that are imprinted in our DNA, in our brains, somewhere in our system that we learn from our ancestors. For example, there's a large part of us on this planet, a large number of us on this planet, who don't need alarm clocks. We do not need alarm clocks because we set ourselves for the time that we need to wake up. Now, how we do this, nobody knows, but we do this nonetheless. On the other hand, there are people like my old Sergeant Allen, I swear to you, cavalry charge could not have woken him up. He used to borrow everybody in the barracks alarm clock and set them all at the same time so he wouldn't miss class. We'd sneak into his room and turn off all the alarm clocks, and then put a sick day sign on his door or something, so he'd miss his test. But Kim Allen was a nice guy. He took it all with stride. Perfect sergeant, I think. But anyway, as this goes, so like you say, some of us can do that, other people can't. Why? What makes us different? Well, it's not what we eat or drink or whatever. It's got to be something inside of us that makes us different in that regard. Okay, now what is really controversial is the idea that mammals, all, including human beings, also have collective memories, also have a collective intelligence, if you would, just like ants and bees do. Now, as they say, that's very controversial, but they've discovered species of rats that have a queen rat, and all the other rats follow her orders, and they act as one brain. Now, I've never known anybody to suggest that there's such a thing as rat talk, or a language between the rats, or anything of this sort, but somehow they're communicating with their leader, if you would. And in many other species, you see the same thing. Go outside about this time of year, maybe a little earlier actually, and watch the geese and the swans flying away and the ducks flying away for the winter. Do you ever wonder who decides when they're going to get up and fly? Who decides in the flock that who the leader will be, and when it's time to back off, and who takes the place afterwards, or whatever in the flights south? And the idea that there may be a collective memory among birds, where they're able to think as a group. Anyway, there's some belief that this is also true of human beings, but that's awfully dangerous ground to get to, because you might be labeled as a crackpot by academia, but that does not necessarily mean you are wrong. 1963, I was a third grader. I was a third grader, and it was time to go home on the bus. And everybody was screaming and crying and pitching a fit. And I asked, what is going on? And they told me that President Kennedy had been assassinated. I said, hooray, he's finally gone. And everybody told me to shut up. Now, the thing of it is, these same people who just the week before have been promising they were going to go to Washington and kill Kennedy because he was a communist and he was a terrible person, and he was all of these things I won't go into. Now, all of them are crying, all of them are upset because President Kennedy is dead. They acted like a herd. You know, now what caused this? Maybe a psychiatrist will give you some fancy term about group psychology or something, and explaining that it's just human nature, but then you have to ask, what is human nature but human instinct? On the other hand, there are people who will scientists who will tell you this is our group emotion, our group feeling. It was something that passed all among us, and that this is some sort of psychology of the mob. And there were French psychiatrists in the late 19th century who explored that. And they never said we had group emotions or group thought, if you would, or group communication, but it would certainly explain a lot of the theories that they built on hard evidence. Anyway, something to keep you awake at night. Okay, mammals and reptiles descend from a four-legged ancestor. Birds and dinosaurs descended from a two-legged ancestor. Now you're saying, wait a minute, there were dinosaurs like everybody's favorite, the Brontosaurus and the Stegosaurus, and such that had four legs. Yes, but look at those four legs. The two legs up front are little bitty legs, the two legs in the back are great big legs. Its ancestor stood upright and had short arms and long legs. On the other hand, you look at human beings, our legs and our arms are not that far apart in size. Now, you see some evolutionary difference because we use our hands very differently than we use our legs or something. Reptiles are the same way. You look at the legs of an alligator, for example, And all four legs are exactly the same. Like human beings, reptiles descend from a four-legged creatures. Now, something else that had a huge effect on history, and I'm not quite sure how all of it ties together, but the world as we see it, has one long chain of mountains all the way around it. Now, a geologist might say that if there's any truth to that crackpot theory, the truth comes from the fact that the world is made up of several geological plates. Often when these plates collide with each other, they create mountains. But I find it fascinating that the mountains all link up together. You start with the Atlas Mountains, which are just about the only mountains poor old Africa has. You cross Gibraltar, the Straits of Hercules, or the Straits of Gibraltar. You know, for most of the history of the world, that's been closed. It's so narrow. You cross the mountains across Spain, across the Alps, across Europe, then the mountains across to Turkey, across the Middle East, across China, even to the Bering Strait here between Russia and Alaska, which is not that great. And then you go down the coast and the Rocky Mountains and all these other mountains of various names, all the way down to the mountains of the South Pole. You could write a great history of the world if all you did was explore the history of all the places where you could pass a ship between these mountains, all the places where you could walk between these mountains. Such places as the Khyber Pass in Pakistan and the Cumberland Gap in Tennessee, and what huge effects they had on history. Because human beings, as far as mountains go, we're just not goats. That's what it comes to. And we will always look for the easiest way through this chain of mountains. But of course, that has affected history so many times in so many places. The Earth has 6 continents and 4 oceans. Once upon a time, they were all one and the same, but that time has changed. That time has changed, although the day will come when they will all be back together again. Whether we'll be here or not is another issue, but we will someday be one continent again. Islands are very special places, economically, environmentally, and culturally. In the isolation, there grows uniqueness, such as the famous Galapagos Islands, where Charles Darwin first developed his theory of evolution. Special civilizations of Malta and Easter Island show that civilization can even grow and flourish in isolation. The greatest island of all is Africa, where humanity began in isolation. And some islands not surrounded by water, such as the isolated communities in the jungles of New Guinea, where people have never met humans outside of their own tribe. They are that isolated. The spectacular mountain city of Machu Picchu in Peru, which is so out of the way, you have to make a special trip to see it. It's a great tourist site, but anyway, it's so isolated you actually have to spend a few days in Lima getting used to, getting used to the difference in air pressure in order to be able to breathe when you get up there. Okay, and of course the geography has affected the weather across the planet over time. Once upon a time, North Africa, the Sahara Desert, was a green, lush savanna the size of the United States. But then weather changed over the North Atlantic, and it turned into the desert that it is today. Presumably somewhere down the road the weather could change again, and maybe they'll have rains in Africa, and maybe the Sahara Desert will go back to being a wilderness, green and lush again. Now, extinction. Now, Charles Darwin never really understood extinction in his evolutionary theory, but then he didn't understand a lot of things. He's like Sigmund Freud. He may not have been right about a lot of things, but he points us in the right direction, where we can make the discoveries we never did. But extinction comes by being eaten by other species. That's what happened to the last of the big animals in North America. The Indians came in and ate the last mastodons, ate the last giant rhinos and horses and whatever. It can also be caused by environmental changes. What really wiped out the dinosaur was disease, well, environmental changes. Something crashed into Knoxville, where Knoxville is today, that 13,000 years ago, and that changed the environment so savagely. Almost all the large animals, including humans, went extinct. And then there was exposure to new diseases. Current theory is that most of the dinosaurs were wiped out because the continents came together and different breeds of dinosaur spread diseases that they did not have immunity to, and the dinosaurs were already on the road to extinction when a meteor came through, crashed, and killed off the last of them, giving mammals and birds their chance to, if you'll excuse the expression, take off. It is easy to blame humans for climate change, such as global warming, or to assume that environmental change begins by affecting the plant life and then upwards to the more advanced animals, such as a dinosaur, but the opposite can be true. Human beings can have a role in roles such as eliminating wolves or woolly mammoths, but most extinctions of even large animals were done without human help. Most of the species on this planet that have disappeared from nature. Human beings had nothing to do with it. However, at the rate we are exterminating species now, even in Alabama, unique species even in Alabama, that statement may not be true in the not too far future. On the other hand, there are some species like the rhinoceros that was probably doomed to extinction, but we saved it. Maybe out of guilt or something, or just because rhinoceroses are a lot of fun. Scientists believe that the world has gone through 5 major extinctions, including what wiped out the dinosaurs, and that we are in the middle of a 6th extinction. But the 6th extinction is man-made, unlike the other 5. The 6th extinction is man-made. Okay, all right, let's talk about human beings. That's what we've been talking about. Okay, the earliest known human ancestor was Australopithecus africanus, also known as Lucy, named after a Beatles song. She was about that tall. As an adult, she was about that tall. But she's an amazing creature. She had a big brain. She had hands and a thumb, and hands and a thumb, and a working arm. That is one of the greatest innovations of nature. It's been said that, human beings being able to be self-aware, being able to think like we do, all these things that we do make us special. But there's a strong argument that it's our arms. For some reason, nature never produced arms on any other creature like what we have. And the elbow is just wonderful. It allows you to bend and move, and then your opposable thumb and fingers. Even chimpanzees and gorillas do not have arms as magnificent as ours. But the idea that our brains and everything else good about us and special about us comes from the development of our arm makes perfectly good sense, particularly if you have to work with a poor old elephant. I mean, an elephant uses its nose, its snout, as in place of a hand, and it's just not the same thing. Dinosaurs never developed arms and hands. They operated completely with their mouths. And in fact, if you look at something like a T-Rex or another predator, the hands are just about useless. In fact, they probably were. They never developed elbows or anything like what we had. All right, there are many species that were bipedal, which is something, in other words, walks on 2 legs. Think of a chicken, for example. But nobody's thinking that chickens will dominate the world or anything like that. But we become bipedal. Now, we originally walked on 4 legs, and scientists say that the reason we have so many problems with our backs is because we never fully accommodated to walking upright. I mean, yeah, after a year or 2, you're going to walk upright because that's what you're intended to do. But we still have some physiological problems that go back to our ancient ancestors with 4 legs, as this goes. But we do walk upright. even beyond other apes, not only become bipedal, but develop sophisticated, we've already talked about that. All right, Homo erectus, that is our immediate ancestors, spread from Asia. Oh, and by the way, know about Australopithecus being our first ancestor. But Homo erectus spread across Asia, and 430,000 years ago, one of them carved an elaborate symbol on a seashell in New Guinea. Now think about that. Homo erectus starts in Africa, and 430,000 years later, it's on an island in Indonesia, carving designs on shells. Oh, 430,000 years ago, we don't know when they started. Now there were several varieties of humanoids. We've identified so far more than 20, and surely there's even more. These were competitors to our ancestors, Homo sapiens or Cro-Magnon. Know for your test that a Homo sapien and a Cro-Magnon, it means the same thing, and that's who our ancestors are. So tonight at supper, you could bring up the fact, well, son, what did you learn today in Professor Davis's World History class? And you say, I learned that I'm a Homo sapien. Well, son, I want you to know your family's going to give you all of the support we can. And we've been wondering when you were going to come out of the closet. No, that's not what you think. Anyway, all human beings are Homo sapiens or Cro-Magnons. And our ancestors started only 60,000 years ago, which is truly amazing. In evolution, 60,000 years is nothing. But all of a sudden we go from whatever preceded Homo sapiens, Homo erectus or something, to the human beings in only 60,000 years. And actually considerably less than that. Okay, the brains of the humanoids may have been very different from our brains. They probably would have thought we were retarded. We probably would have thought they were retarded. And in both cases, both of us would be right, considering our environment, the environment that we were in. Most famous loser on this giant island of Earth was Neanderthal. Now, it was once believed that there was no reason to believe Neanderthals and human beings ever combined. Now, thanks to DNA tests, we know differently. I knew it all along. I've had 6 brother-in-laws, and you can't tell me that Neanderthals are not still with us. I mean, all of them had one eyebrow and slanted, and they grunted a lot. But anyway, my brother-in-laws were more like the Flintstones than us. But anyway, we now know by DNA tests that we all have Neanderthal in our blood, our DNA, and we've now discovered that at least some of the Neanderthal bred with another creature we haven't even found yet. We only know it by its DNA. But anyway, the humanoids were close enough that they could breed together. We know because we find in the mixtures of the DNA. But all human beings, but particularly white Caucasians, have more Neanderthal DNA in them than any other humans. But all humans have it somewhere in their family tree. Okay. Anyway, we know the Neanderthals get a bad rap. They get a bad rap. But actually they were such advanced creatures, we do not understand why they went extinct and we won. They were bigger than we are. They had bigger brains than we do. They recognized each other. They lived in families. They buried their dead with grave goods. When you bury your dead with grave goods, what does that tell us? When an ancient man buried the dead with grave goods.
They had a culture.
Do what?
They had a culture.
Speak up.
A culture.
You're very close to it, but not just a culture. What else?
Civilization.
Do what?
Civilization.
No, you're going the wrong way. Okay, you bury somebody with their stuff. You know, you bury your Neanderthal father, and you leave his MP player with him, and yes, ma'am.
Religion?
Bingo! You have to believe in an afterlife if you're going to bury somebody with their stuff. Otherwise, you just keep the stuff. But the fact that you bury them with food and you bury them with their bow and arrow or their club or, like I said, their MP player or something, then that tells their cell phone, whatever, then that means you must believe that there is a life after death. Otherwise, you wouldn't bother. Otherwise, you would not bother. Okay, anyway, there's all sorts of reasons. One belief in why the Neanderthals failed is that they lived in a Europe, in a world that was much colder than ours, much more ice covered, and they survived it well, whereas Homo sapiens, we wouldn't have done so well. Then the climate changes, the ice recedes, the Homo sapiens come out of Africa, and while we prefer a warmer climate, the Neanderthals did not have enough time to evolve into someone who could live in a warmer climate. And so the Homo sapiens overran them. Now, some theories have it that Homo sapiens had abilities that allowed them to work together, to be smarter, to be able to breed more often, to be able to raise their babies more successfully than the Neanderthals did, all of which may be true or none of which may be true. We just do not have a way of figuring that out. We do not have a way of figuring that out. Okay, one possibility is that Neanderthals may not have had a sense of the future or the past or the present, so they could not plan things the way Homo sapiens could, which I guess defines big dumb brute. But like I said, Neanderthals achieved a great deal. They just were not us. They just were not us. All right, human beings begin in Africa, which is an amazing mystery in itself. Actually, South America and New Guinea have much more life in their jungles than Africa does in its. Yet it's in Africa that the most sophisticated life on Earth develops. Human beings develop in Africa, human beings leave Africa, human beings come back to Africa, etc. In fact, there were two near extinction moments for the human race, and in one of them, at least one of them, all that survived of the human race was some 6,000 people who lived in South Africa. And we know absolutely nothing about them except their DNA. We're able to follow the DNA from skeletons back to there. But maybe there was somebody there who ruled a kingdom in South Africa of 6,000 people, all that was left on the human planet, and then organized them and kept them going until the climate changed and we could spread out all over the world again. Okay, humanoids left Africa from Ethiopia into Yemen, where the Red Sea is so narrow between Africa and Asia that Moses and his Hebrews, escaping Pharaoh, may have actually crossed into Yemen there at the Red Sea and not in the north as some people have thought. Okay, now Africa is not only a land that created the sophisticated human being and human species, Africa also creates the world's deadliest diseases, its most complicated diseases. AIDS, Ebola, dengue fever, yellow fever, malaria. They all begin in Africa. They all begin in Africa. And for that reason, Africa was always very limited in civilizations that could start there. Now, Africa had some great civilizations, Egypt being one of the greatest. And you can't say, well, Egypt is a white or brown culture that moved in from the Middle East. Egypt was just as black as it was any other color, and just as African as it was anything else. And there were other great African civilizations, but the problem with Africa was disease. And there was so much disease in Africa, so many types of diseases, that civilization, basically speaking about civilization as we know it today, in civilization begins where human beings can get out of Africa, away from the diseases, enough that people can live together in cities and form their civilization. We're talking about Katachi in Turkey. We're talking about Jericho in Israel. We are talking about Malta off the coast of Sicily. We are talking about Pakistan and India. We are talking about China. And we are talking about Bolivia and Peru here. Now we'll talk more about this in a moment, but there was one of the many things that we can't explain. Why did civilization begin all over the world at almost the same moment? Did we just spend years and years spreading human beings all over the planet, and then one day the weather changed or something, and we suddenly had enough crops that we could build cities and we could become civilization? Or is the story much more complicated than that? Most recent finds argue for it's much more complicated than that. But one of the great mysteries that remains ununderstood. Okay, anyway, now don't get me wrong, cities like Babylon and London and many others and Rome, they were real disease pest pots, if you would. People would settle there, and I mean, London, for example, throughout most of its history, had more people dying in London than were being born in London. How is it London never disappeared? People came from the rural countryside and came to live in London. Same thing with Babylon, same thing with all the great cities. It's just that the level of disease was not so high as to completely wipe out the city. All right, Jacob Bronowski. He was an award-winning chemist who made many very important discoveries. After he retired as a chemist, there was a question he wanted an answer to. His whole family had been murdered by the Nazis at the Auschwitz concentration camp, and he wanted to know why human beings would do such a thing to each other. And so he wrote a brilliant book that was made into a wonderful TV series called The Ascent of Man. You can rent it on Netflix, and it's decades out of date, but it still has a lot of important things to say. Bronowski never understood, never got his answer. He never really understood why people kill each other, or why people kill each other just because they're a different color, or a different religion, or a different whatever they are. But he raised a lot of important points. For example, he puts mathematics to the human race. And what I'm about to tell you before, when I told you that you're going to hear some disturbing things in this class, and you're over there saying, I already feel disturbed. Well, hold on, it's going to get worse. All right, among the things Jacob Bronowski argues in The Ascent of Man, that left-handedness, race, colorblindness, and sexual preferences are non-existent. We are all partly gay, we are all partly heterosexual, we are all partly left-handed, we are all partly right-handed, we are all partly colorblind compared to some, everybody is colorblind compared to somebody else, except maybe me. I see the world in wonderful colors, but that's because of a genetic condition I have. But anyway, be that as it may. Thing of it is, we are all of these things. We are all African. We are all from Iraq in the Middle East. Okay? As I said, there's less than 1% DNA genetic difference between us and chimpanzees. And this was one of the big points he made. And one of the things why he could not understand why people do the horrible things that we do. None of us are that different. None of us are that different. Just move the little knob a little more one way or a little more the other way, and there you are. And what is it that Jesus said in the New Testament about that he who is perfect cast the first stone? And what is that? There's another really good saying along the same lines about, well, I can't remember it now, we got away from it. But this idea that, don't criticize anybody until you walk a mile in their shoes or something, until you understand where they come from, which is a good thing. But when you do that, understand that they and you are the same person. Like I said, it's just a minor adjustments here and there. Even race, really, if you put the numbers of differences in human beings before a mathematician, they will tell you none of it is statistically significant. It's all meaningless. Well, me off my soapbox for a moment. Okay. Or me on my soapbox for a moment. Okay, anyway, so it goes. All right, much of our problems as human beings, he discovered, does come from our biology, including our sexual preferences. We hate people of a different color because we fear that they're going to challenge our babies for food and opportunities, etc. And that's why you find prejudice in all people, in all species. You have prejudice, but at the same time you're attracted to somebody who is so physically different from you. Again, that's biology and nature. Okay, in Hebrew, Greek, Roman, and other traditions, the biology also has played a major role in how we view women. Anyway, the more sophisticated a society becomes, and know this for your test, the more sophisticated a society becomes, the less prejudice that it accepts, the less prejudice that it accepts, the less sexism that it accepts, and the more it learns to live with people. So you're saying, what about Germany in 1939 when Adolf Hitler took over and the concentration camps? Believe me, they never put it up to a vote with the German people, are we going to murder Jews or not? They never put it to a vote, are white people superior to black people? They never put it to a vote. Most of Adolf Hitler's own Nazi party did not know about the death camps. So it was more of somebody who was a sociopath becomes the head of a organized government and then uses the organized government, the civilization, to feed his own prejudices and commit the murders that he does in the case of Adolf Hitler. Okay, anyway, women in the Hebrew society, Greek society, Roman traditions, and many others, Chinese tradition as well, women are basically baby machines, and they're extensions of the men who breed them, if you would. I guess I can't put that any more delicately. But there were civilizations that sprang up at the same time that respected women. I guess that's the best word I could find for it. In ancient Egypt, we'll be talking about it, I believe, next time. Ancient Egypt. Women in ancient Egypt were treated with the same respect as men. They were not treated the same way, but that was because they were women and men were men. Men did things like go to war, women and plow the fields, women had children. And it was not because the Egyptians disrespected women. In fact, it was illegal for a man in Egypt to own property. Only a woman could own property. And you were Pharaoh of Egypt, the top man in Egypt, not because you were the son of the previous Pharaoh, but because you were married to the previous Pharaoh's daughter, even if she was your sister. But this is where the Pharaohs marrying their sisters comes in. But we'll talk more about that. And there's a very old book that first hit on all of this. It was called When God Was a Woman, about societies that not only respected women, but worshiped women. You look at the Minoan wall paintings and such, and they have priests. The Minoan civilization was either ran by women, or at least its religion was ran by women. You don't dig up a tomb and you don't find a Minoan burial site or something like that and find statues of men. You find statues of women. And oddly enough, the thing that is held most against women, their ability to give birth, was celebrated among the Minoans, also celebrated among the Egyptians as well. I guess what it really all comes down to, even to the present day, is the how you respect a woman's rights, and the ability of a woman to give birth right up to the present time is used as an excuse to deny women all rights, or as many rights as you can. Nobody on this planet, now I'm getting back on my soapbox again, warning, but nobody on this planet likes abortion. However, it should never be used, which is always used as an excuse for controlling women and telling women that they are second-class citizens and that they don't have enough going for them to run their own lives. That's me on my soapbox. Allow me to get down now and go back to today's lesson. Okay. Often, in order, extermination and of the different and the weaker is done in order to provide resources for your own children. It's the same thing goes on today. We just have better names for it. But often countries are invaded, countries are robbed of their resources. Sometimes it's not even by war. Sometimes it's by colonization and today exploitation. You go into some third world country, you take everything of value from that country, and you say, well, we're helping them to find a place in the 21st century. And what you're helping them find themselves is a giant, disease-ridden slum left over after you've stolen everything they had that was of value. Okay, exploitation of natural resources to extinction, that happens all over the world. It happened with the American Indians in what is today Alabama. It happened with the Mayans in Mexico. It's been said that if Cortez had not invaded and conquered the Aztecs would have disappeared within 100 years because their agricultural practices were horrible. But the same thing went on in the Middle East, the same thing went on to Africa, in China. Well, at one time, the world's greatest city was in West Africa, and that was Timbuktu in Mali. And it was an amazing place. It had universities, it had the world's greatest libraries. It was one of the world's largest cities. In a recent remake of the novel Roots on television, Kunta Kinte wants to go to Timbuktu to study to be a lawyer, which he could have done. Okay, you go to Timbuktu today and it's a dirty ruin. The universities are gone, the libraries have to be protected by the local people, and things like this. What happened? They cut down all the trees for mortar, they cut down all the trees for firewood. When the trees were gone, Mali fell into just a disastrous state. But this, like I said, goes on all over the planet. And environmentalists will warn you it's going on right now. There are environmentalists who will tell you we will all be dead by 2030. Frankly, on that prediction, I hope they're wrong. But I don't see anybody jumping up and down and saying, we've got to do something now to avoid that, even though we're the only species in the history of this planet smart enough to realize we have a problem and with the ability to do something about it. Okay, things like horses marked a huge advance in civilization. The original horse was only the size of a Cocker Spaniel. They went extinct in the New World only to survive in the Old World. The Chinese, the Egyptians, and the Hittites bred the horses so they were big enough to pull a chariot. Big enough to pull a chariot. Then by the Dark Ages, we're able to breed horses to the size that we can have armored knights riding on them, and we can have armored knights riding on them, and we can fight battles, and they can plow fields and things like this. The horse has always been the most efficient use of food for energy, particularly when they got big enough that they could pull really heavy things like really big plows. Okay, human beings began as plant gatherers and moved to hunter farmers. There are cave paintings in France, like the ones we've been showing you here. Well, that's not one of them. Let me move us back.